Most people don't realize the amazing amount of history and engineering behind a simple deck of cards. 52 different cards, 54 with the jokers, over the last 1,000+ years. Playing cards have undergone a significant evolution as various countries and cultures have adapted them to feature colors, designs, and symbols that best reflect their own unique cultures. Yes, I said over the 1,000+ years. Playing cards are that old, and if you want a brief history of playing cards, check out my other video. Today, we explore the facts about how we finally landed on the design that can be found on nearly every deck of cards in the world. Even the super rare and unique playing cards have design inspirations from everything you'll see in this video. The exact origin of playing cards is contested by historians to this day. Some reports suggest they may have surfaced as early as 9th century China during the era of the Tang dynasty. However, during this time, they were believed to be used as ornate gambling pieces for other games like mahjong or chess. It wasn't until the late 14th century that we saw our first recorded account of playing cards being used in the ways we are accustomed to today. While living in a Swiss monastery, a German monk named Johann wrote about the burgeoning popularity of playing cards and the variety of card games that they were being used for. Potentially inspired by tarot cards, European card makers began using swords, clubs, cups, and coins as the suit symbols on their playing cards in the 14th century. Known as the Latin suits, this imagery can still be found on some Italian and Spanish playing cards in the modern day. Additionally, as sword translates to spada in Italian and espada in Spanish, these symbols may have laid the groundwork for the modern suits we know today, spade. Now it's the 1400s, around the turn of the 15th century, and the Germans are developing their own suits. We have hearts, bells, acorns, and leaves. This imagery was believed to be more indicative of the German life. Around the same time, the French put themselves into the conversation by becoming the first card makers to split a card deck into two colors, red and black. This simplified color scheme allowed them to drastically improve production speeds. Instead of every card being a bunch of different colors, we had two main colors. The French also evolved the German suits to create the first iteration of what would ultimately become the suits we find in the standard decks today. They kept the Germanic heart symbols, the bells were replaced with carreaux or diamonds, the acorns became trefoils or clovers or clubs depending on what you want to say, and the leaves were transformed into peaks, or pikes or spades. Fast forward almost 100 years, and right before the start of the 16th century, high taxes on playing cards forced French card makers to relocate their operations to Belgium. As a result, the English began importing French playing cards and eventually adopted the suit names we know today. Combining the translation of both the Italian and French designs, they formed the names clubs, hearts, spades, and diamonds. Despite changing the names of the suits, these English cards still featured lavish French designs until the import of foreign playing cards was banned in the early 1600s. Eager to continue capitalizing on the massive popularity of playing cards, the English began producing their own playing cards. In the late 19th century, the French designs were remodeled by Charles Goodall and Sons into the graphic symbols or pips commonly found on playing cards today. Around the same time, Thomas de la Rue and the de la Rue Printing Company further streamlined playing card designs in a way that allowed them to increase output and reduce costs. This mass production ultimately led the English design to become the standard for playing cards. De la Rue was also the first playing card manufacturer to break the nearly 5 centuries old tradition of using plain backs on playing cards. He introduced simple lithographic designs that, beyond providing improved aesthetics, were intended to make the cards more difficult to mark by card cheats. However, despite advances in the playing card design, con artists continued to find new ways to cheat at cards. Whether you're a magician, you just like card games, or you're at all familiar with cards, it might be a little wild to think, but the suit and value was not always printed in the corner of a playing card. The concept of corner indices wasn't actually introduced until the late 19th century when American card maker the New York Consolidated Company created its Squeezers playing cards. However, while corner indices were a significant development, the United States is probably best known for the impact it had on standardizing playing card design and streamlining the manufacturing process. Most notably, the United States Playing Card Company, which you have heard of, they make the bicycle playing cards, has evolved into one of the largest playing card manufacturers in the world over the last 130+ years. Their signature bicycle playing cards have set the standard for what most people picture when they think of a deck of cards. So we know that there are 52 cards, 54 with jokers, 4 suits, and 2 colors in a standard deck of cards. But what does that all mean? The answer to this has been heavily debated. created. Some historians suggest that these designs were meant to represent the four classes of medieval society. However, there are some major disparities that impact the validity of this claim. For example, it's believed that coins, which eventually became diamonds, represented merchants in the Latin suits, yet this would not have held true for the French decks because diamonds were much more closely associated with the upper class and wealthy aristocrats in France rather than the merchant class. Others believe that the four suits may represent the four natural elements of water, hearts, fire, clubs, earth, diamonds, or air, spades, or even the four seasons. Some have taken this a step further by showcasing amazing correlations between the cards in a deck and a calendar year. Check out my other video. At the end of the day, it's most likely that there wasn't an extensive amount of thought and planning given to the symbolism behind the playing card designs. They were most likely commissioned by wealthy families and therefore reflect the tastes and interests of a single noble person at the time. With that being said, the court cards do have a bit of fascinating history on their own. The court card imagery we know today was first developed by French card makers. Each one was actually modeled after famous historical figures. For example, the kings are all noteworthy rulers from history: Julius Caesar, King David, Charlemagne, and Alexander the Great. The queens were not always part of these court cards either. Earlier Spanish decks had knights or caballeros in place of queens, while German decks had an Obermann, or the upper man, and an Untermann, the lower man. The latter would eventually become the modern-day jack, for those of you who are paying attention. Jacks were also originally known as knaves, but the slang term jack was eventually adopted to avoid confusion because both the king and knave started with the letter K. The queens were eventually reintroduced by the French and the British. However, at one time, the English had a unique rule that allowed the ranking of the queen and king in a card game to be swapped based on the gender of the person ruling over the monarchy at the time. While we're on the subject, the King of Hearts is one of the most discussed playing cards due to the fact that it looks like he's impaling himself in the head with a sword. Known as the Suicide King, this imagery is actually a result of a printing error and not some sort of deep symbolism, but we keep it around because it's fun to talk about a deep symbolism. As playing cards began to be printed quicker and in larger quantities, the integrity of the artwork began to suffer. Printing blocks began to wear out from the constant strain, and card makers would just copy the blocks or cards instead of making new blocks. Any errors would then get amplified each time, eventually leading to the edge of the King of Hearts sword disappearing completely. One last little fact about the Ace of Spades. During the French Revolution, the ace was shifted from the lowest card in the deck to the highest card as a symbolic gesture of peasants rising up to conquer royalty. Around this time, the Ace of Spades also emerged as the most prominent playing card. You may have noticed the ace gets a little bit of a different design. Well, the Ace of Spades, not all the aces that is. If you take a look at them, only one of them stands out. The reason for this is the English government implemented a tax on playing cards in the 18th century, and card makers would have to prove they paid their tariffs by placing a special stamp on their Ace of Spades. Now, we don't have to do that anymore as the playing card tax is no longer enforced. The Ace of Spades continues to feature as the boldest design in most decks of cards, from standard bikes to the most elaborate custom playing cards. If you want to learn more about the history of Magic and playing cards, it's free to subscribe to the channel, and I put out a video every once in a while. Or if you'd like to learn some pretty cool card tricks, go ahead and join my channel or check out my online store. Thanks so much.